I used to think I knew Monique Harris. I was wrong. She was so much more than she let anyone see. My name is Terrence, and I never meant to be the kind of man who falls in love with someone else's wife.
Hey story lovers, welcome back to Folklore Galore. Grab your favorite snack, settle in, and let's begin the story.
From the first day Monique walked into the claims office, wearing that pale blue blouse and carrying a tote with her initials stitched in red, I felt something shift under my ribs. Her perfume was soft, something powdery and clean that lingered in the space between our desks. When she smiled, it looked like a reflex she'd practiced in the mirror, just wide enough to seem polite, never so wide that you'd call it warm. She was the sort of woman who made you want to sit down and listen. Even when she said nothing, the air around her felt heavy, like a story was trying to break free. Most people ignored her. They were too wrapped up in their deadlines and gossip to notice. But I saw the way her hands trembled when she signed her name, the way her eyes darted to the door every time it creaked open. We started talking over vending machine snacks. At first, it was harmless, small things. The weather, the printers always jamming, the stale smell of the carpet in the break room. Then, one evening, with the overhead lights buzzing above us like angry wasps, she mentioned Sophie. Her voice shifted when she said her daughter's name, like it was the only bright thing she had left. "She's 6, she murmured, stirring powdered creamer into her cup. "Lost her first tooth last month." I tried to imagine them together. Monique brushing Sophie's hair in the morning, packing her lunch, tucking her in, while the hallway stayed dark and silent. She pulled out her phone and showed me a picture. Sophie, with her arms looped around Monique's neck, her face blurred in motion like she was laughing. It looked real enough to make my throat tighten. After that, we found excuses to talk. I'd bring her coffee when she looked tired. She'd leave tiny post-its on my monitor. Thank you in her neat, sloping handwriting. It became routine, like breathing. It didn't feel dangerous, not then. I didn't see the bruises right away. She was careful. High collars, long sleeves, that careful way she folded her arms if she thought someone was looking too closely. It wasn't until she reached across my desk one afternoon, the warm smell of her skin and something floral rising around me, that I noticed a dark bloom at the edge of her cuff, the color of old plums. Her hand froze. For a second, her eyes flicked up, meeting mine in that washed-out office light. There was something in them, fear, maybe shame, but it vanished so quickly I almost thought I had imagined it. "Monique," I started, my voice low. "If you ever need—" She shook her head, a tiny motion that sent a strand of hair slipping from her bun. "Terrence, don't." The next morning, she slipped a folded note into my hand while we passed in the hall. Her fingers were cool, the paper softer than I expected. "If anything happens to me or Sophie, it's Darius. Please don't tell anyone I gave you this." I read the note twice. The letters were steady, deliberate, like she'd written it sitting at her kitchen table, the house too quiet, the lamp throwing shadows against the wall. When I looked up, she was already walking away, her shoulders set like she was bracing for some blow I couldn't see. That Friday, she didn't come to work. The seat at her desk stayed empty, the screensaver casting a slow blue glow across the cubicle. I called her phone. Once, twice, 3 times. No answer. That night, I drove to her street. Just to be sure, I told myself. I knew where she lived because I'd offered her a ride home once, months earlier, when she'd locked her keys in her car after a late shift. She tried to tell me she'd call a cab, but it was almost midnight, and the parking lot was half dark, so I insisted. I remembered the house, small, white siding, A porch with a cracked step she apologized for like it embarrassed her. She pointed to the window where she said Sophie's nightlights stayed on, so her daughter wouldn't be afraid of the dark. The neighborhood was hushed. Every porch light turned off except one. Her front window glowed dimly, as if someone had left a lamp burning in a hurry. Darius's truck sat crooked across the driveway, the hood still ticking in the cooling air. I parked half a block down, gripping the wheel, watching my breath fog the windshield. For 20 minutes, I sat there listening to the faint chorus of insects and the low hum of my engine. The smell of burnt coffee from the thermos in my cup holder made me nauseous. When I finally turned the key and drove away, I told myself I was overreacting. I told myself it was none of my business. I didn't know then that nothing would ever be the same. The next morning, I didn't even bother pretending to focus on the quarterly reports. Every time the phone rang, I felt my heart jump into my throat, half expecting Monique's voice on the other end, but the calls were never for me. By noon, the stale air in the office had turned thick with old coffee and the heat of too many computers, and I felt like I was breathing through cotton. I told my supervisor I wasn't feeling well and asked if I could head home early. She barely looked up from her computer when she waved me off. Her street looked different in daylight, quiet, in that way neighborhoods sometimes get when everyone's at work, or asleep, or pretending not to hear what happens behind someone else's walls. The sun was climbing over the roofs, the sidewalk already warming under my shoes. The blue Ford was gone, but an oil stain marked where it had been. I walked up to the porch and knocked. My hand left a smudge on the white paint. The doorbell was one of those cheap plastic ones that chimed like a toy piano. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time, until my knuckles ached. The only sounds were a sprinkler sputtering in the yard across the street and a dog barking somewhere behind the houses. I pressed my ear to the door and thought I heard movement, a scuff against the floor, the quiet creak of a board. But when I called her name, the silence came back, bigger than before. When I got home that night, I couldn't eat. The spaghetti I made turned cold on the counter. I kept seeing her face in my head, eyes wide, mouth pinched the way it got when she was trying not to cry. I told myself she'd gone to stay with a friend. Maybe she'd finally left Darius. Maybe she'd found the nerve to get away, but I didn't really believe it. On Monday morning, she came back to work, like nothing had happened. She was wearing the same blouse she'd had on the week before, washed and ironed so stiff it barely wrinkled when she moved. Her hair was pulled tight again, but this time there was a thin red line across her cheek. Nobody else seemed to notice, or if they did, they pretended not to. She didn't look at me when she sat down. I tried to concentrate on my claims. The keys clacked under my fingers, a rhythm I knew by heart, but none of the numbers made sense. Finally, I stood up and walked to her desk. Monique. My voice sounded too loud in the hush of the office. She didn't look up. Can we talk? She shifted a stack of folders, her hands steady, and for a moment, I thought she was going to pretend she hadn't heard me. Then she exhaled, one long breath like she'd been holding it in for days, and nodded once. We ended up in the back stairwell, the cement steps cool under us, the smell of old paint and dust settling around our shoulders. She kept her eyes on her lap. He said if I ever left, he'd find us, she whispered. Even if it took years. He said... Her voice broke, and she pressed her palm to her mouth. She took another breath, and when she spoke again, her voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it. Before I came in today, I took Sophie to my cousin's place in Harrisburg. He doesn't know her. I told her not to answer the door for anyone, to keep the lights off at night. I just needed to know she was safe before before I figured out what to do. I didn't know what to say. My chest felt too tight, like my heart was trying to crawl up my throat. "I can't keep pretending I don't see this," I said finally. "You have to let me help." She looked up then, and there was something in her face, some mixture of relief and terror that made me feel like I'd already crossed a line I couldn't come back from. That afternoon, she didn't go home. I drove her to a cheap motel off the interstate, the kind with peeling green paint and a buzzing neon sign that said vacancy. She carried one small bag and nothing else. While she checked in, I sat in the car with the engine idling, breathing in the sharp, chemical smell of the air freshener clipped to my vent. I watched her through the glass, the way she ducked her head when the clerk handed her the key, as if even the act of being seen was a risk. When she came back out, she opened the passenger door but didn't get in. She just stood there, looking at me like she was about to say something that would change everything. "Thank you," she whispered. Her voice was hoarse, almost gone. Then she closed the door, turned away, and walked into the room without looking back. I sat there for a long time, the dashboard clock ticking over to 8:23, the sky bleeding out into a deep violet. I told myself I was doing the right thing, that I was saving her, that she needed me. And for a while, that was enough. For a few days, everything went quiet. She called in sick 2 days in a row, and nobody at the office seemed surprised. I kept waiting for someone to ask questions, but nobody did. She texted me once, just a line to say she was okay. That was all. I went to work, came home, lay in bed staring at the ceiling while the shadows shifted across the walls. I started checking the news, convinced I'd see a headline about Darius filing a missing persons report or finding her car abandoned somewhere, but nothing came. On Friday, I couldn't stand it anymore. I drove back to the motel. The neon vacancy sign buzzed above the entrance, painting everything in a sick green glow. I could see the thin gap in her curtain where the light leaked out into the parking lot. I knocked, my heart thudding so loud it almost drowned out the hum of the vending machine beside the office door. For a long time, there was nothing, no footsteps, no movement at all. Then I heard the lock click. When she opened the door, the stale air hit me first. Like old cigarettes and something sour, the smell of fear left too long in a small space. Monique looked smaller than I remembered, wrapped in a gray blanket over her clothes. Her hair was down, loose around her shoulders, and her eyes were rimmed red. "Can I come in?" I asked. She hesitated, then stepped back. The room was dim, lit only by a lamp on the table. A styrofoam cup of instant noodles sat untouched beside the phone. "I can't stay here," she said, her voice cracking. "I keep thinking he's going to find me. He's going to follow me here, and then..." She trailed off, hugging the blanket tighter. "You did the right thing," I told her. My voice sounded too steady, like it belonged to someone braver. "You got Sophie somewhere safe. You left. That's what matters." She sank onto the edge of the bed, her shoulders hunching. "You don't know him," she whispered. "You don't know what he's capable of." Outside, a car engine backfired, and she flinched so hard she nearly dropped her phone. I moved without thinking, crossing the small space between us. My hand hovered over her shoulder before I let it rest there, feeling the shiver that ran through her. "I'm not going to let him hurt you," I said. When she looked up, her eyes were wet and shining. "Terrence, I don't know what I'd do without you." That night, I didn't want to leave her there alone. Every instinct in me said to turn back, to stay. But I told myself I had to give her space, to think, to breathe, to feel safe. I drove around for hours, the heater blasting, the same stretch of highway rolling under my tires. Every time my phone buzzed, my chest clenched. But it was never her. I ended up back at the motel around midnight. Her room light was still on. I knocked, ready to say I just wanted to make sure she was okay. She opened the door like she'd been waiting for it. "I thought you weren't coming back," she said. "I shouldn't have," I replied. But I stepped inside anyway. The room smelled faintly of sweat and something sweet, maybe cheap lotion. She sat on the edge of the bed in an oversized t-shirt, her legs pulled up beneath her. "I just want to feel safe," she said, "even for one night." She reached for me, and I let her. When she kissed me, it didn't feel like a mistake. It felt like proof that everything I was doing, everything I was risking, meant something. She fell asleep with her hand on my chest, and I laid there wide awake, staring at the ceiling, already half ruined by what I knew I'd do next. I didn't see Monique for 3 days after that. I told myself she needed time, that if I showed up too soon, I'd push her away. But I couldn't stop thinking about her. Not just the night we spent together, but the way she'd looked at me before she fell asleep, like I was the only safe place left in her world. Every hour that passed scraped against me like glass. I kept checking my phone, rereading old texts, trying to convince myself that silence didn't mean I'd been used. I thought it meant something. Maybe it did. But the silence that followed carved holes in me I didn't know how to patch. On the 4th day, she called me just after midnight. Her voice was small and jagged, like she was speaking through a throat raw from crying. "He was here," she whispered. I saw his truck. He circled the parking lot twice. I turned off all the lights, but I know he saw me. My hand tightened around the phone until it felt like the plastic would crack. "Did he come to the door?" I asked. "No." Her breath caught. "Not yet." I couldn't sleep after we hung up. I sat in my kitchen, the overhead light buzzing, the old linoleum cold under my feet. I kept thinking about her huddled in that motel room with the curtains drawn, waiting for the door to splinter open. By morning, I'd made up my mind. The next night, I parked a block away from her house. The street was dark, except for a porch light 3 doors down, and the yellow glow spilling from a cracked garage window. The cold settled into my skin, numbing my hands. It wasn't the first time I'd been there. I'd driven past before, telling myself I was just checking, just making sure she hadn't been forced back. But this time was different. I sat with the engine off, watching the house. Every time I thought about turning the key and leaving, I saw her face. Those hollow eyes, the way her voice shook when she said she couldn't breathe when he was near. It was almost midnight when the truck pulled into the driveway. The headlights swept across the yard, catching on the dead grass and the porch rail that had been splintered since summer. Darius climbed out, moving slow, like he was made of something heavy. He shut the door with more force than he needed to, and stood there a moment, staring up at the dark windows. I pressed my hand to my chest, feeling my heart hammering under my palm. My breath fogged the glass, and I wiped it away, not wanting to lose sight of him. When he went inside, I sat perfectly still, listening to the creak of the old suspension settling under the weight of the truck. I don't know how long I waited. Long enough for the cold to seep into my bones. Long enough to start wondering if Monique was right. If he really would find her, hurt her, drag her back to that house she'd run from. When I finally got out of the car, my legs were stiff, my knees locking. I crossed the street, the gravel crunching under my shoes, loud enough I was sure someone would hear. I didn't think about the consequences, not about the law or what this would make me. I only thought about her, about Sophie, hidden somewhere in Harrisburg, waiting for a mother who might never come home if I didn't do something. I crouched beside the truck, my breath fogging in the cold night air. The wire cutters in my pocket felt heavier with every step, like they knew what I was about to do. I slid under the truck, the oil-stained gravel biting into my back. The brake line was a thin, ribbed hose, fragile as a vein. I fumbled with the wire cutters in my pocket, my hands shaking. One clean snip would have been faster, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Instead, I pressed and twisted the blades, working slowly until the hose weakened enough to fail under pressure. A thin, sharp ringing started in my ears. I pressed the heel of my palm against my forehead, squeezing my eyes shut. All I could see was the black fluid seeping across the driveway, the wire cutters still slick with brake fluid, my hands shaking like they didn't belong to me. When it was done, something inside me went quiet. Like a voice I'd been ignoring had finally stopped screaming. I stood up, wiping my palms on my jeans. My heart felt too big for my ribs. As I walked back to my car, I didn't look at the house. I didn't let myself think about what I'd done. I told myself this was the only way to keep her safe. And for a little while, that was enough. The cool came the next morning, early, when the sun was just starting to creep over the buildings outside my window. I'd been drifting in and out of sleep on the couch, still wearing the same clothes from the day before, the air stale with the smell of reheated coffee and something sour I couldn't place. At first, I didn't recognize her voice. It was high, strangled, almost unrecognizable. "Terrence," she gasped, and then she started sobbing so hard the phone crackled with it. "Monique!" I sat up too fast, the blood rushing from my head in a dizzy wave. "What's wrong? What happened?" "He's dead," she choked out. "Oh God, he's dead." I gripped the edge of the coffee table to steady myself. "What are you talking about?" "Darius," she said, the word breaking apart in her throat. "The police came to the motel. They said he lost control of the truck on the highway last night. He must have been coming here to find me. They said it flipped. He was gone when they pulled him out." The room tilted around me. My mouth went dry. I swallowed, the word catching in my throat. "I don't understand." Her breathing hitched, ragged and wet. "He must have been coming to hurt me. I know he was. I could feel it. I could feel him getting closer." She made a sound that wasn't quite a sob, more like a strangled gasp. "He's gone." "You should come here," she whispered. "Please. I don't know what to do." I drove to the motel in a daze. The morning traffic blurred past in smears of red taillights and exhaust. Every time I blinked, I thought I could feel the cold metal in my hands again. When I knocked on her door, she opened it like she'd been waiting inches away. Her face was blotched and raw from crying. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, tangled in places where she'd gripped it too hard. She didn't say anything, just pulled me inside and buried her face against my chest. Her shoulders shook with each ragged breath. "I'm so sorry," I whispered, though I wasn't sure who I was saying it to. Her. Myself. The man I'd killed without ever meaning to. She looked up, her eyes glossy and red. "I keep thinking, if I hadn't left, maybe he wouldn't have been driving around like that," she whispered. "Maybe this is my fault." I tried to answer, but nothing came out. My throat felt scraped raw. We stayed like that for a long time. Her pressed against me, the air between us too hot, too close. A siren wailed somewhere in the distance, rising and falling as it passed. When she finally pulled back, she wiped her face with the back of her hand. "I have to talk to the police again," she murmured, They said they'll call me later. I nodded, but my vision felt blurry, as though I was seeing the world through someone else's eyes. I don't know what happens now, she said softly. I don't know anything anymore. I did the only thing I could think to do. I reached for her hand and held on like it was the only thing keeping me upright. And in that moment, I almost believed that was true. I don't remember much about the week after Darius died. It blurred into a gray smear of workdays I didn't finish, meals I didn't taste, and long silent drives between the motel and my apartment. Monique stayed hidden. She said she couldn't face going back to her house, couldn't stand the thought of packing boxes with his things still in the closet. Sometimes I brought her food. Most of the time, she barely touched it. When she talked about Darius, her voice would go flat, like she was reading from a script she'd memorized too well. He was always angry, she'd say, staring at the TV that played old sitcom reruns she never watched. He used to say, if he couldn't have us, nobody could. I didn't ask questions. I told myself it wasn't my place. A few days later, I came by to drop off groceries. I knocked a few times. I was about to turn away when I heard the bolt click. The room was dark, except for the flickering blue light of the television. Her hands folded neatly in her lap. When she looked up, her face was empty in a way that made something in my chest seize. They called, she said quietly. The insurance people. They want me to come sign some paperwork. I nodded, not really understanding. She stood and walked toward me, stopping just close enough that I could smell her shampoo. Something clean and sweet that made me ache in a way I couldn't name. Will you come with me? She asked. I can't do it alone. Of course, I said. My voice felt too thin. I didn't know then what it meant. 6 days later, the police came. They showed up at my apartment in the middle of the afternoon. 2 plainclothes detectives whose faces blurred at the edges of my vision. They asked about the night Darius died, about why my car had been parked on the next block over, about whether I'd ever threatened him. One of them flipped open a thin folder and set it on the table between us. We have footage, he said. A neighbor's security camera caught you walking toward the house around midnight. The crash reconstruction showed his brakes failed. Forensics pulled the truck, found the line had been deliberately cut, not frayed, sliced. I opened my mouth to explain, but the words stuck in my throat like wet paper. One of them read me my rights. I remember the way the metal of the handcuffs bit into my wrists, the cold certainty of it settling under my skin. I kept waiting for Monique to call, to show up, to explain everything. She didn't. They held me for questioning for what felt like hours. My mouth was dry, my palms slick with sweat. They asked the same things again and again, and I gave them the same answers. No, I didn't touch the truck. No, I didn't follow him. No, I didn't want him dead. After a while, the detective with the tired eyes sighed and set his pen down. You need to understand, he said, his voice low, almost kind. She's saying you were obsessed with her, that you did this on your own. I felt the world tilt, like the floor had dropped out from under me. She said you wanted to be with her, he continued, that you threatened Darius. You said he was in the way, and you'd handle it. I tried to speak, but nothing came out. My heart was beating so fast, it felt like it would split apart. That night, sitting alone in the holding cell, I replayed every moment I'd spent with her, every look, every quiet confession, every time I told myself I was saving her, and I wondered if any of it had ever been real. They kept me for 48 hours before my lawyer managed to get me out on bail. By the time I walked into my apartment, the sun was already sliding behind the buildings, turning everything the color of old bruises. I sat on the edge of the couch in the same clothes I'd been arrested in. I still smelled like the holding cell, sour, metallic, stale. My phone was dead, the battery blinking red when I tried to turn it on. Part of me still thought there would be a message from her, waiting. Some explanation. There wasn't. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe I needed to see her face to believe any of it was real. Maybe I thought if I could just look her in the eye, I'd understand why. One day when I visited her, on the motel nightstand, she'd left an envelope once, white, with the logo of the insurance company in the corner. I'd picked it up and set it back down without thinking. Now I couldn't stop seeing it in my mind. I drove to the insurance office. The receptionist behind the counter looked up with a polite, practiced smile. "Can I help you?" I'm her brother," I said. My voice sounded hollow. "Monique Harris. I'm trying to understand what she was doing here." The woman frowned slightly, but after a moment she tapped something into her computer. "She just left, actually. You just missed her. She was here to finalize the disbursement." "Disbursement?" I echoed. She hesitated, lowering her voice. "The life insurance claim for Mr. Darius Harris." I tried to swallow, but my throat felt tight. Was she here alone? Or with her daughter? Her daughter? The receptionist's brows pinched together. "I'm sorry, she didn't have anyone with her." I blinked. "Sophie," I said, my voice cracking. "Her little girl." The woman shook her head slowly. "Sir, there's no child listed on any of her paperwork. No dependents." I must have looked confused, because she went on, gentler this time. "It was a large policy. $500,000. I'm sure this is a very difficult time." $500,000. No daughter. I left without saying anything. My legs felt hollow all the way to the car. I don't remember the drive back, just flashes. The red of a traffic light on my windshield, the flicker of a neon sign, my hands shaking on the wheel. When I pulled into my parking lot, there was an envelope taped to my door. No name on the outside. Inside was a single piece of paper, typed, printed on plain paper. No signature, no emotion, just words. "I didn't want you to get hurt. You were the only one who was kind to me, and I'll never forget that. But I needed someone who would believe me without asking too many questions. Someone who'd go all the way. I'm sorry, truly. But once I started this, I had to finish it." That was it. She said sorry, but not to me. Not in a way that mattered. Just one last script, printed neat and cold, like I was a role she'd finished playing. I sat on the floor of my kitchen for a long time, the envelope in my lap, the paper softening under my damp fingers. In the end, there was no trial for her, no arrest, no consequences I ever saw. She disappeared like she'd never existed at all. No forwarding address, no trace except my name tangled up in the wreckage. Sometimes, when I can't sleep, I think about her somewhere warm, somewhere quiet, cashing the check, drinking coffee she didn't pay for, telling someone else a story about a little girl named Sophie who never existed. And I wonder how many times she'd practiced saying my name in that small, grateful voice, just enough softness to make me believe I was saving her. I don't know what's going to happen to me. My lawyer says the charges might stick. Maybe not murder, but something close enough that it won't matter. Even if I walk free, nothing will ever go back to how it was. My name will always be the one they whisper when they talk about what happened. The man who thought he was saving someone, and ended up helping her kill someone for money. Sometimes, late at night, I catch myself wondering if she ever really thought about me at all, or if I was just another step in a plan she'd been refining long before I ever knew her name. The detective later told me there was no record of any police calls to their house, no hospital visits, no complaints from neighbors, just two people who'd been estranged for years, and a policy she couldn't cash until he was dead. And Sophie? She never existed. There were no school records, no birth certificate, no cousin in Harrisburg, just a few photos on her phone of a girl I've now learned belonged to someone else. Either way, the outcome is the same. My life in pieces. My conscience stained with something I can't wash off. If you want something from me, here it is. Don't mistake pity for love. Don't tell yourself you're a good person just because you're willing to bleed for somebody else's tragedy. Be careful who you decide to bleed for. Some people, like Monique Harris, will look you dead in the eye while they set the trap, and smile when you step into it. If someone shows up with a story so sad it makes you feel like you have to save them, stop. Look closer. Because some people don't want help. They want control, and they'll take it. Through your kindness, if that's what it costs. And when you finally lower your guard, they'll step over your body on their way out the door, leaving you to hold the wreckage when the curtain falls. So please, learn from my mistake.